Well, there he is. Michelangelo's Dave.
David.
Oh, what's wrong, Marge?
The Simpsons has done it again. For decades, this cartoon has slipped in jokes that somehow echoed real life years later. And now, the predictions pointing toward 2026 feel more unsettling than ever. Some are lighthearted, others hit way too close to home. But together, they paint a picture you won't want to miss. From hidden clues scribbled in chalk to moments that shook entire industries, these are the predictions that keep fans talking. We've lined up 15 of them, and one in particular will leave you speechless. Laugh line turned into surveillance shock. In July 2007, The Simpsons movie brought the beloved animated family to the big screen, blending slapstick humor with biting satire. One short but memorable scene features the Simpsons fleeing on a train after the government places Springfield under quarantine. Marge tries to reassure Lisa by saying, "It's not like the government is listening to everybody's conversations." The film immediately cuts to a massive surveillance facility, where rows of agents are shown eavesdropping on calls, including Marge's. At the time, this was widely taken as an absurd exaggeration, a cartoonish jab at growing concerns about privacy and government overreach. Fiction met the actual world again, 6 years later, in 2013. Edward Snowden, an ex-contractor for the National Security Agency, NSA, leaked highly classified documents proving vast surveillance programs. The revelations contained secrets that the US government had been collecting huge amounts of people's phone metadata, internet communications, and private data that affected millions of individuals around the world. The sheer enormity of the surveillance shocked audiences once more and ignited worldwide debates on privacy, safety, and civil liberties. What had once looked like an impossible joke in the Simpsons movie suddenly felt most disturbingly true. The media showed that movie clip once again by throwing it into the Snowden-inspired Revelations pot as just another instance of the Simpsons' weird to predict real-world events. It is possible that the writers could have never intended for the part, but parodying public paranoia concerning government spying. This scene seemed to anticipate a very real scandal. Taking a punchline and turning it into a visual gag inadvertently illustrated a future reality. Mass surveillance, not as science fiction, but as something quietly going on years before it dawned upon the populace, just as the cartoon cheekily implied. If that twist gave you chills, brace yourself. The next one sinks even deeper. When Homer's dive echoed tragedy. In January 2006, The Simpsons aired the episode Homer's Paternity Coot, Season 17, Episode 10. The story revolved around Homer discovering he might have a different biological father, a treasure hunter named Mason Fairbanks. In an effort to bond, Homer joins Mason on an undersea expedition to locate the wreck of the fabled treasure ship Piso Mojado. The adventure takes a dark turn when Homer pilots a small one-person submarine. His sub becomes trapped in coral, communications are cut off, and his oxygen runs dangerously low. He nearly dies before being rescued at the last moment. At the time, the scene was dramatic yet comedic, another parody of Homer's reckless misadventures. 17 years later, in June 2023, an uncanny parallel arose between this real-world tragedy and its dark counterpart of the OceanGate Titan submersible. A private submersible with 5 adventurous tourists on an expedition to view the wreck of the Titanic went missing soon after submersion. International search efforts yielded no results, and it soon became clear that the sub had imploded under pressure at great depths, slaying instantly all on board. Such events attracted global media coverage and intense questions about the safety of experimental submersibles. Fans of The Simpsons quickly made the connection. Homer had made a similar dive in some fictional episode. Small subs, loss of communication, and life-or-death fights at great depths could be found in both narratives. Discovering such writings in the show's staff was even mentioning that he had taken dives with Titan years ago. Earlier to all these tech failures. Though the episode wasn't a prediction, the similarities accentuated the actual dangers of extending technological limits in extreme environments. What began as a comical experience in 2006 later became an eerily mimicked tragedy in 2023, when lunch jokes became reality. In 1994, The Simpsons aired an episode titled Sweet Seymour Skinner's Badass's Song, April 28th, which included a brief gag. The school lunch cafeteria's food barrel was labeled assorted horse parts, now with more testicles. At the time, this was treated purely as dark humor, a cartoon exaggeration of how grim public school meals can be. The writers likely never intended it to resonate beyond a quick laugh. Fast forward nearly 2 decades to 2013, when the so-called Horsemeat scandal erupted across Europe. Tests revealed that meat sold as beef in the UK, Ireland, and France was contaminated. Some batches containing little or no beef, but instead horse DNA. This discovery triggered a massive public outcry. Consumers felt betrayed. Supermarket shelves were cleared. Brands issued apologies. Governments and food regulators launched investigations to restore trust in the supply chain. Suddenly, a joke from The Simpsons began to feel creepily prophetic. Even though The Simpsons did neither cause nor supposedly predict the scandal in any way, the resemblance was, indeed, uncanny. In popular imagination, cartoon fiction and real life had now collided. Humor that had once masked the very bitter critique of institutional food had transformed into a haunting specter. What might have once seemed absurdly exaggerated might, in fact, reflect real danger. The joke soon became fodder for media commentaries, with many noting how the show seemed to anticipate the contamination crisis years before it made headline news. One may argue this coincidence or an acute exaggeration, but the phenomenon of horsemeat school lunches has further meaning. It suggests how biting satire touches truth at those moments when regulatory failure, cost pressure, and supply chain complexity coincide. Agile reflection on food safety, regulation, and consumer assurance in the case of The Simpsons joke boils down to a cautionary tale in the history of modern food supply, something beyond bragging rights. 3 eyes, 1 nuclear warning. In 1990, The Simpsons aired an episode titled 2 cars in every garage and 3 eyes on every fish, November 1st, which satirized pollution and corporate negligence. In it, Bart goes fishing near Springfield's nuclear power plant and catches a strange orange fish with 3 eyes. The mutated creature, quickly named Blinky, horrifies the town and becomes a symbol of how industrial pollution poisons the environment. At the time, the scene was recognized as an over-the-top critique of corporate irresponsibility. Radiation from the power plant literally deforming wildlife. To viewers, it was a clear environmental allegory wrapped in absurd comedy. 2 decades later, the actual events have provided the cartoon with a disturbing twist. In 2011, an Argentinian fisherman caught a 3-eyed fish in a reservoir near the nuclear facility in Córdoba. The pictures circulated on news channels worldwide, and Blinky's resemblance was uncanny. While the reports of the fish's deformity went on, and scientists stopped short of declaring an association with radiation, imagery of such a deformed creature being found so close to a nuclear plant seemed immediately disturbing and perhaps symbolic to many. Multi-eyed fish have turned up from time to time, including sightings from New York State lakes and a 3-eyed catfish from Brooklyn. While mutations like these may occur naturally from some form of genetic anomaly or contamination, their rarity only adds to their ominous connotation. For the general public, that blurred distinction between satire and prophecy is something they live with. An environmental destruction cartoon gag morphed into a worrying symbol of ecological consequences. In truth, The Simpsons did not just entertain, it conjured real fear concerning pollution, nuclear energy, and other non-obvious prices of industrial progress. When autocorrect gets it wrong. In 1994, The Simpsons episode Lisa on Ice, aired November 13th, featured a small but memorable gag involving the Apple Newton, one of the earliest digital assistants. In the scene, school bully Kearney tries to write a note on his Newton that says, "Beat up Martin." But the device's handwriting recognition misinterprets the scrawl and translates it as "Eat up Martha." The joke was quick, but it captured something essential: the frustration of technology that misunderstands its user, often with comically disastrous results. At the time, the Apple Newton was cutting-edge but flawed. Its handwriting recognition became infamous for inaccuracy, and The Simpsons immortalized that weakness in a way that outlived the device itself. What seemed like a throwaway gag in the mid-1990s turned into a surprisingly prescient commentary on the future of smartphones and predictive text systems. In the 2000s and the 2010s, Autocorrect had become part and parcel of texting on the iPhone and other Android-powered gadgets. Users soon understood this double-edged sword. Typing was faster, but the deleted-in translation meaning made occasional words completely ridiculous or embarrassing. Its mockery turned the ducking substitution to a curse word into one of the most popularized frustrations of contemporary communication. Interestingly, Apple engineers later acknowledged that at the development stage of the iPhone, the phrase became a cautionary term, "Eat up Martha," reminding the development team to take care in making the autocorrect as reliable as possible. Continued improvements notwithstanding, autocorrections remain a feature of digital existence. The very first joke about a lame widget betrays a cultural touchstone for millions of daily miscommunications between humans and machines. The Simpsons have turned a jab into a metaphor for the limits of smart technology. When art faced cartoon censorship. In 1990, The Simpsons aired Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, December 20th, an episode that tackled censorship through parody. The storyline begins with Marge outraged by the violence of the Itchy and Scratchy cartoons, prompting her to launch a campaign against their influence on children. At first, she is successful, rallying Springfield to tone down media content. But the debate soon escalates beyond cartoons. The conflict reaches its peak when a copy of Michelangelo's David, the Renaissance masterpiece, is scheduled for display in Springfield. Because the statue is nude, a vocal group of citizens demands it be covered up, even suggesting pants. Ironically, Marge, who had spearheaded the censorship movement, objects. She defends David as a great artist who should not be altered, exposing the contradictions in censorship debates. The episode cleverly shows how easily moral outrage can spiral into absurdity, especially when it collides with cultural heritage. That was 25 years later. Reality matched the cartoon. In 2016, in St. Petersburg, Russia, a public duplicate of Michelangelo's David was brought to controversy. Some locals were offended by nudity, and a petition started going around to cover the statue with a fig leaf. Even went to a public vote about whether anything would be done, but officials decided otherwise. The parallels to Springfield were uncanny. The same questions about art, morality, and decency resurfaced, centuries after Michelangelo created the work, and decades after The Simpsons followed the debate. That bit covered how satire can anticipate timeless cultural clashes. On the one hand, art and censorship, whether in Springfield or in Russia, stand for the continuing rift between the protection of sensibilities and the integrity of the artist. The Simpsons mocks the absurd nature with which these discussions arise time and time again with ungodly persistence. From bronze to Simpsons' gold. On February 14, 2010, The Simpsons aired an episode titled Boy Meets Curl during the Vancouver Winter Olympics. In it, Homer and Marge unexpectedly become members of the United States curling team. Against all odds, the cartoon couple helps Team USA triumph over Sweden, capturing the gold medal in curling. The setup was intentionally ridiculous. At the time, the US had little reputation as a curling powerhouse. Before the episode aired, America had only managed a single Olympic curling medal, a bronze in 2006. The idea of the US winning gold, especially against traditionally dominant Sweden, was played for laughs. 8 years after that, in 2018, the joke became reality all over again. John Schuster's team, the US men's curling team at the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, shocked everyone as they defeated Sweden in the finals and took home gold. Just like in the episode of The Simpsons, it all happened. Then, the even bigger surprise was how improbable the win was. Team USA started very poorly in the tournament and was widely regarded as an underdog. But to turn that all around and bring home gold was hailed as one of the biggest surprises at the Games. Fans were quick to make the connections between the cartoon and reality, and a new round of discussion about The Simpsons' strange talent for predictive future happened. The writers later claimed, however, that the storyline was inspired by how curling grew pop in 2010, not by any prophecy. The uncanny part is that the entire situation, the US, the gold, and Sweden as the adversary, makes it impossible to forget that coincidence. Hold on to that surprise, because what comes next rewrites the rules entirely. Debt crisis, straight out of Springfield. In January 2012, The Simpsons aired an episode titled Politically Inept with Homer Simpson. In it, Homer briefly appears as a guest on a cable news show. While he rants on air, the crawl at the bottom of the screen delivers a throwaway gag. Europe puts Greece on eBay. At the time, this line was just a quick joke about the Eurozone's financial troubles and the perception that Greece's struggling economy was a burden on Europe. Viewers likely laughed and moved on, not realizing that within a few years, the joke would feel eerily close to reality. By mid-2015, Greece's financial crisis reached a breaking point. After years of borrowing heavily and enduring austerity measures imposed by international lenders, Greece defaulted on a payment to the International Monetary Fund (IMF) in June, becoming the first developed nation to do so. The missed payment amounted to 1.6 billion euros and triggered widespread panic in global markets. Citizens faced closed banks, withdrawal limits at ATMs, and soaring unemployment. The country teetered on the edge of leaving the Eurozone altogether, sparking fears of wider economic instability across Europe. Greece was not auctioned online, but this metaphor had weight. For many observers, the nation seemed stripped down piece by piece, and assets were privatized with harsh austerity imposed in return for bailouts. Suddenly, that satirical line from The Simpsons' crawl reflected a horrible reality. Greece felt its sovereignty undermined by finance. Once a background gag, it morphed into a prophetic-sounding commentary on debt, globalization, and the precariousness of national economies in a tightly woven finance structure. The Simpsons predicted Gaga's skyfall. In May 2012, The Simpsons closed its 23rd season with the episode Lisa Goes Gaga. The story centered on Lady Gaga visiting Springfield to lift the town's spirits. True to her reputation for flamboyant performances, the show depicted Gaga in outrageous costumes, metallic outfits, and even suspended in midair. One scene stood out: Gaga soaring over the audience, held by cables, while dazzling in a silver ensemble and playing a guitar. At one point, her outfit even shot sparks, parodying her reputation for theatrical, boundary-pushing stunts. At the time, this sequence was regarded as a cartoon exaggeration of an already larger-than-life pop star. It was February of the year 2017. Lady Gaga was to be the main performer during the halftime show of Super Bowl LA. Millions of people were in for a huge surprise when she appeared before the audience as she descended from the roof of the NRG Stadium in Houston, attached to wires, while wearing an extravagant outfit. Immediately, this performance attracted comparisons with the animated counterpart of hers from The Simpsons. The only differences between the cable suspension of the glittering costumes and aerial theatrics were uncanny. The net was agog in having side-by-side comparisons, with fans going all gaga to show how a 5-year-old cartoon seemed to have predicted such performance. Even the same Lady Gaga came out and admitted that the similarity gave her shivers, although she specified that aerial entrances seem familiar in pop performances too. Still, The Simpsons captured the event with so much accuracy, not just for Gaga, but for the specific stage it placed within the show, further adding to the reputation of the series for almost eerily predictable foresight. What was meant as parody for Gaga's eccentricity became an animated prelude to one of her most famous live moments. The Great Grease Heist begins. In August 1998, The Simpsons premiered its 10th season with the episode Lard of the Dance. In it, Homer stumbles upon a new get-rich-quick scheme, selling used fryer grease. After learning that leftover grease can be turned into profit, he ropes Bart into a greasy side hustle. The pair siphon grease from fast food restaurants and even attempt to drain the school cafeteria's supply, only to run into groundskeeper Willie, who, hilariously, turns out to be another grease thief defending his turf. The plot was played for laughs, highlighting Homer's endless appetite for shortcuts to wealth, no matter how absurd. What an outrageous premise at that time. Who in their right mind would want to go stealing cooking oil? Yet within a matter of a decade, what had once seemed a cartoonish absurdity turned into reality. By the late 2000s, what had previously been just a discarded dumpster fryer oil was transformed into a goldmine because of biofuels, a phenomenon that turned restaurants to change their tune from paying to dispose of it into hoarding oils for profit. Demand high grease theft. Thieves armed with hoses and oil tanks would siphon oil from the dumpsters in the darkest light of the night. By 2013, estimates showed that the underground black market with stolen grease had cost U.S. businesses up to $75 million every year. Police departments across the country had the high task of bringing a stop to these grease bandits, a crime wave odd enough to be lifted directly from an animated flick. News articles would often hearken to The Simpsons, noting how Homer's fictional capers seemed to foreshadow an actual underground industry. At the start, it was quite a ridiculous idea, turned now into a reflection of how quickly economic value changes everything, such that waste turns into loot, and satirizing future realities with almost uncanny precision. Cartoon VR, real-life obsession. In October 2016, The Simpsons aired Friends and Family, Season 28, Episode 2, where Mr. Burns experiments with virtual reality. Using headsets, he constructs an artificial family that behaves exactly as he wants, quickly becoming obsessed with his digital world. The Simpson family also tries VR and experiences the strange allure of fabricated realities. Years earlier, in the 2000 episode Bart to the Future, an adult Bart is shown miserable and isolated, hiding behind a VR visor to escape his problems. At the time, these plots leaned into science fiction parody. Virtual reality was still considered futuristic, and few imagined it becoming commonplace. Come the 2020s, and such warnings seem extremely real. Virtual and augmented reality gadgets are now crucial components in the fields of gaming, entertainment, education, and the workplace. The recent launches of Meta, Sony, and Apple into VR mainstream through the 2023 Vision Pro have pushed VR, another entirely digitized ecosystem, including the metaverse, to harbor individuals spending incrementally more time in artificial environments. Studies have already been linking prolonged VR exposure with social isolation, detachment, and even some behaviors that verge on addictive, especially among younger users. Indeed, the cautionary tale that has been carved culturally from The Simpsons has come in the form of characters preferring to simulate their lives rather than meet human interactions. Furthermore, the show had also foreseen through such media the technological and psychological impact, their escapism, loneliness, and virtual identity. It is Marge's rather tender warning. Wherever you take them, let them be virtual spaces. Nothing takes the real-world cost. The most immediate reality is that what once passed for cartoon satire is rather real. Societies struggle in this era of fast digitalization with balancing innovations with well-being in humankind. Mechanical mayhem in Springfield style. In October 1994, The Simpsons aired the episode Itchy and Scratchy Land, Season 6, Episode 4, a parody of Disney-style theme parks with a dark sci-fi twist. The family visits a violent, cartoon-themed amusement park where lifelike robot characters entertain guests. At first, everything seems safe and exciting, with Homer joking, "Nothing can go wrong, possibly go wrong." That's the first thing that's ever gone wrong. But soon, the machines malfunction. The robots turn on the visitors, wreaking havoc in a mechanical uprising. The Simpsons survive only by using camera flashes to disable the rogue androids. At the time, it was a playful nod to Westworld, 1973, and a lampooning of our trust in technology-driven fun. Fast forward to the 21st century, and the idea suddenly appears not so comical. Artificial intelligence and robots have made a leap, becoming drivers of industrial automation and customer service. In 2023, quite an eerie episode unfolded when a Moscow chess-playing robot shattered the finger of a little boy during a match, emphasizing how the malfunctions of safe machines can cause harm. In the meantime, robots are on mall patrol, assisting at surgeries and delivering parcels, quietly asserting their presence within our daily lives. The itchy and scratchy land genocide emerges almost like a satirical herald of our overconfidence with technology now. While there is no robotic revolution in the apocalyptic, questions about autonomous weapons, AI bias, and safety mishappenings are no longer relegated to science fiction. Homer's blind faith bears an even stronger resemblance to our society, and their faith in technology and its advantages, while turning a blind eye to potential risks. Now, the insane Odyssey, and once dismissed as an exaggerated cartoon depiction of chaos, stands as a reminder of how fragile things become when safeguards are forgotten, and a call for greater awareness of what could go wrong. Vegetarian, Lisa saw it coming. On October 15, 1995, The Simpsons aired the episode Lisa the Vegetarian, Season 7, Episode 5. In it, Lisa visits a petting zoo, bonds with a lamb, and makes the life-changing decision to stop eating meat. The storyline is filled with humor, including Homer's disastrous barbecue, where a whole roasted pig ends up flying through the air. But beneath the comedy lies a deeper message about diet, sustainability, and the ethics of food consumption. Apu even shows Lisa his rooftop garden, a quiet moment suggesting self-sufficiency and mindful living long before those ideas became mainstream. Vegetarianism, at that time, was still considered a niche practice in many households within the West, often relegated and joked about, rather than fairly discussed. But, with hindsight, this episode feels like a quiet warning of the imminent, if rather suppressed, truth that has been worrying global food systems. By the mid-20s, warnings about food insecurity for the reasons of climate change, increased population, and depletion of resources have been sounded by scientists and international organizations. As meat production consumes and pollutes a lot of water, grain, and land, while simultaneously countlessly contributing toward greenhouse gas emissions, it is now believed that reducing meat consumption and transitioning to a more plant-based diet are some critical preventions in order to avert a crisis. Today, newspapers are screaming with headlines warning of soaring food prices, drought-induced crop failures, and supply chain disturbances to feed billions. The scene, therefore, renders prophetic Lisa's stand as a young girl refusing to eat meat. Other than a personal moral choice on the part of a cartoon character, it now represents one of humanity's greatest collective issues. Homer's chalkboard hid a big secret. In September 1998, The Simpsons aired an episode called The Wizard of Evergreen Terrace. The plot followed Homer Simpson as he decided to reinvent himself as an inventor, inspired by his idol, Thomas Edison. In one memorable scene, Homer is shown standing in front of a chalkboard scrawled with a jumble of numbers, formulas, and equations. At first glance, it was simply a visual gag, evidence that Homer had no real understanding of science. To the casual viewer, the math was just nonsense scribbles meant for comedy. However, years later, scientists took a closer look and discovered something remarkable hidden in the chalkboard clutter. One of Homer's equations proved to be quite similar to that formula which approximated the mass of the Higgs boson, often nicknamed the God particle. This subatomic particle, theorized in the 1960s, is responsible for giving mass to other particles. Its existence, however, was officially confirmed only in 2012 by experiments at CERN's Large Hadron Collider. The finding won the Nobel Prize in Physics the following year. A little while back, Homer's chalkboard scrawl seemed almost too eerily close to the real-world calculation towards which scientists spent decades trying to confirm. It is an entirely uncoincidental accuracy. David X. Cohen, who is also a writer for The Simpsons, has had quite a good education in physics and computer science. He went to physicist friends to try and make it seem as realistic as possible. However, this idea that Homer Simpson stood once before a close approximation of the Higgs boson mass 14 years before its actual discovery became a favorite anecdote in pop culture as well as in science. That hidden equation was shocking, but the last one proves comedy can expose something far darker. From satire to FIFA's downfall. On March 30th, 2014, The Simpsons aired You Don't Have to Live Like a Referee, an episode where Homer is recruited to officiate matches at the FIFA World Cup. The storyline satirized international football by portraying FIFA as riddled with corruption, bribery, and shady dealings. In one memorable scene, a FIFA official is hauled away in handcuffs for misconduct. At the time, many viewers laughed at the exaggeration, since rumors of FIFA corruption were common, but nothing had yet broken into the public record at that scale. It seemed like a comedic dig at an organization that carried an air of suspicion. Reality caught up with a bang just a year later, in May 2015. It was a surprise when the U.S. Department of Justice, working with the FBI and IRS, rocked the world through sweeping investigations to uncover decades of corrupt activities within FIFA. Senior officials were arrested in Zurich under allegations of bribery and racketeering, with money laundering also thrown into the complaint. It was headlines screaming across the world about how open flows of money changed hands for bids on tournaments and marketing rights. The great scandal rocked international football to the resignations, barrings, and tampering with long-term changes in governance structures. The uncanny similarities are completed in The Simpsons episode, which also features Germany as the World Cup champion. While the show had Germany beating Brazil in the final, reality provided an even more striking echo. Germany crushed Brazil 7-1 in the semifinals, one of the most shocking matches in World Cup history, and then went on to lift the trophy in 2014. Between the predictions from FIFA corruption and Germany's eventual victory, the episode stands as one of the most glaring examples of the show's satirical accuracy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into The Simpsons' most unbelievable predictions, make sure to like the video, drop a comment with your favorite moment, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Your support helps us bring you even more mind-bending content. And don't go anywhere. Check out the next video on your screen right now for another wild ride you won't want to miss.